I watched in complete disbelief as this woman drove my $3,000 riding lawn mower right out of my driveway. She had the audacity to wave at me like she was doing me a favor. 20 minutes earlier, I was enjoying my Sunday morning coffee, thinking the biggest problem in my life was whether to mow the front yard or the backyard first. This stranger had marched onto my property with a clipboard and a measuring tape, claiming she was conducting an official HOA security patrol. She took photos of my yard, lectured me about property violations, and then she stole my lawn mower, right in front of my eyes, in broad daylight, while my neighbors watched and filmed the whole thing. I stood there in my driveway, holding my coffee mug, watching $15,000 worth of landscaping equipment disappear around the corner. That was the moment I realized I was dealing with someone who had completely lost touch with reality. Sunday mornings in Maple Grove subdivision were supposed to be peaceful. The kind of peaceful where you could sit on your front porch with a steaming cup of coffee and actually hear the birds singing over the distant hum of highway traffic. I had worked 60-hour weeks for 3 years to afford this little slice of suburban paradise, and Sunday mornings were my reward. My house was nothing fancy, but it was mine. A modest 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage and exactly 1.7 acres of Kentucky bluegrass that I maintained like it was the grounds of a country club. Every weekend, I was out there with my fertilizer spreader, my edging tools, and my pride and joy. A brand new John Deere X350 riding mower that I had saved up 8 months to buy. That morning, I was particularly proud of how the yard looked. The grass was perfectly striped from my mowing pattern the previous weekend. My flower beds were mulched and weeded. Even my driveway was swept clean of leaves and debris. I took a long sip of my coffee and smiled at the sight of my mower sitting in the open garage, ready for another day of making my neighbors jealous. The Maple Grove subdivision was one of those newer developments where every house looked slightly different but somehow exactly the same. We had a homeowners association, but it was fairly relaxed. Most of the residents were working professionals like myself who just wanted to maintain their property values and avoid any major drama. The HOA sent out occasional newsletters about holiday decorations and reminder notices about trash pickup schedules, but nothing too invasive. Recently, there had been some changes in the HOA board. New management company, new rules, new attitude. I had noticed more official-looking notices appearing in mailboxes and more people walking around the neighborhood with clipboards. There had also been a series of break-ins over the past month that had everyone on edge. Nothing major, mostly garage thefts and stolen packages, but enough to make people nervous. I was scrolling through my phone, checking the weather forecast and wondering if I should mow the backyard before the predicted afternoon thunderstorms, when I noticed a woman walking down the street with a clipboard and a professional-looking camera. She was wearing a bright yellow safety vest and had a measuring tape attached to her belt. She moved with purpose, stopping at various houses to take photos and make notes. I watched her for a few minutes, curious about what she was doing. She seemed to be documenting something about each property, though I could not tell what. When she reached the house 3 doors down from mine, she spent a considerable amount of time measuring the distance between the mailbox and the street. She took multiple photos from different angles and wrote extensively on her clipboard. My coffee had gone cold by the time she finished with that house and moved on to the next one. Something about her behavior struck me as odd, but I figured she was probably working for the city or the HOA on some kind of routine inspection. Maybe they were finally going to do something about the potholes in our section of the neighborhood. I went back inside to refill my coffee mug and grab the newspaper from the kitchen counter. When I returned to the front porch, the woman was 2 houses closer to mine, and I could see her more clearly. She appeared to be in her 50s with short gray hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested she took her job very seriously, whatever that job was. The morning sun was getting warmer, and I was starting to think about getting dressed and heading out to start my yard work. I had plans to edge the sidewalks, trim the bushes by the front door, and maybe even wash my car if I had enough energy. It was shaping up to be a perfect day for outdoor projects. That was when I noticed the woman had stopped in front of my house and was staring directly at me. The woman with the clipboard did not wave or smile. She simply stood at the edge of my driveway and stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then, without any invitation or explanation, she began walking up my driveway toward my front porch. I set down my coffee mug and stood up, trying to project a friendly but cautious demeanor. "Good morning," I called out. "Can I help you with something?" She did not respond immediately. Instead, she stopped about 10 feet away from me and began looking around my front yard with the intensity of a crime scene investigator. She made notes on her clipboard, took several photos of my house, and then focused her attention on my open garage. "I am conducting a routine security patrol and property compliance inspection," she announced in a tone that suggested she had said these words many times before. "I am authorized by the Homeowners Association to document potential violations and safety concerns." I felt my stomach drop slightly. "I am sorry, but I did not receive any notice about an inspection. Are you with the management company?" She ignored my question and walked closer to my garage, peering inside at my lawn mower and various tools. "This equipment appears to be stored in violation of HOA guidelines regarding garage organization and visibility from the street." I followed her toward the garage, my confusion growing by the second. "I am sorry, but what guidelines? I have never heard of any rules about how I store things in my own garage." The woman pulled out a manila folder from her clipboard and began shuffling through various papers. Section 12.4 of the Revised Community Standards clearly states that motorized equipment must be stored in designated areas and cannot be visible from public walkways or streets. She held up a photocopied document that looked official but was difficult to read from my distance. I stepped closer to examine it, but she pulled it back before I could get a good look. "I am going to need to see some identification," I said, trying to maintain a polite tone despite my growing irritation. "And I would like to contact the HOA office to verify this inspection." Her expression hardened. "I do not have to provide identification to residents during routine compliance checks. My authority comes directly from the board of directors, and questioning my credentials constitutes interference with official HOA business." I could feel my blood pressure rising. This woman was standing on my property, taking photos of my belongings, and making vague threats about violations that I had never heard of. Everything about the situation felt wrong. "Look, I am sure this is all a misunderstanding," I said, trying to de-escalate the situation. "But I am going to need you to leave my property until I can verify what you are telling me." She took another photo of my lawn mower and made more notes on her clipboard. "This piece of equipment represents a significant safety hazard and potential liability issue for the community. It is improperly stored and appears to be leaking fluids onto the concrete surface." I looked at my mower, which was sitting exactly where it had been sitting for the past 6 months without any problems. There were no fluid leaks, no safety hazards, and certainly no violations of any rules that I was aware of. "There is nothing wrong with my mower," I said firmly, "and there are no fluid leaks. I maintain my equipment properly." She walked around to the other side of the mower and began examining it from different angles. I am required to document all potential violations and safety concerns. This equipment will need to be relocated to an approved storage area pending a full compliance review. The absurdity of the situation was becoming clear to me. This woman was not conducting any legitimate inspection. She was either confused about her authority or deliberately trying to harass me for some unknown reason. "I am going to ask you one more time to leave my property," I said, my voice taking on a firmer tone. "If you have legitimate concerns about my property, you can contact me through the proper channels." She looked up from her clipboard with an expression that I can only describe as smugly satisfied. "I am afraid that is not how this works. When safety violations are identified, immediate action is required to protect the community." That was when she reached into her pocket and pulled out what appeared to be an official-looking notice. "I am hereby issuing a temporary seizure order for this equipment pending compliance review." I stared at the piece of paper she was holding, trying to process what I was seeing. It looked like some kind of official form with letterhead and official stamps, but something about it felt off. The paper was too clean, too new, and the formatting looked like something that had been created on a home computer. "You cannot be serious," I said, my voice rising with disbelief. "You are not taking my lawn mower. That is theft." She folded the paper and tucked it back into her folder with the confidence of someone who had done this before. "This is not theft. This is temporary relocation of equipment that poses a safety hazard to the community. The equipment will be returned once proper storage compliance is achieved." I watched in horror as she walked over to my mower and began examining the controls. She located the key, which I had left in the ignition like I always did when the mower was parked in my own garage. "Stop," I said, stepping between her and the mower. "You are not taking my property. I am calling the police." She looked at me with the kind of expression that suggested she had been expecting this reaction. "You are welcome to call whoever you like, but interfering with official HOA enforcement actions is a violation of your community agreement and could result in fines and legal action." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, but she continued her inspection of the mower as if nothing was happening. She adjusted the seat, checked the fuel level, and even tested the steering wheel. "911, what is your emergency?" the operator asked. "Someone is trying to steal my lawn mower," I said, keeping my eyes on the woman who was now attempting to start the engine. "She is on my property and claiming she has some kind of authority to take my equipment." The operator asked for my address and began taking down details, but I could tell from her questions that this was not the kind of emergency call they were used to handling. The situation was too bizarre and too complicated to explain quickly. While I was on the phone with the police, the woman managed to start the mower. The engine roared to life, and she began backing it out of the garage with surprising skill. I ended the call and ran toward the mower, but she accelerated past me and headed down the driveway. "Stop," I shouted, chasing after her. "You cannot take my property." She turned the mower onto the street and began driving it down the road like she was taking a casual ride through the neighborhood. I ran after her for about 50 yards before realizing how ridiculous the situation had become. I was chasing a woman who was driving my stolen lawn mower down a public street in broad daylight. By this time, several of my neighbors had come out of their houses to see what was happening. Mrs. Peterson from across the street was standing on her front porch with her mouth open in shock. The Johnson family from next door was filming the entire scene with their phones. I stopped running and stood in the middle of the street, watching my $3,000 mower disappear around the corner. The woman had not looked back once. She drove that mower like she owned it, her yellow safety vest flapping in the breeze as she made her escape. I walked back to my house in a daze, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My neighbors approached me with concerned expressions and dozens of questions that I could not answer. "Did you know that woman?" Mrs. Peterson asked. "I have never seen her before in my life." "She said she was with the HOA," I explained, still struggling to believe my own words. "She claimed my mower was a safety violation and that she had authority to take it." "That is insane," said Tom Johnson, still holding his phone. "I got the whole thing on video. She just stole your mower in broad daylight." I thanked Tom for recording the incident and asked him to send me a copy of the video. I had a feeling I was going to need all the evidence I could gather. 20 minutes later, a police officer arrived at my house to take a report. Officer Martinez was professional and sympathetic, but I could tell from his expression that he was having trouble understanding the situation. "So this woman claimed to be with your homeowners association?" he asked, reviewing his notes. "That is what she said. She had official-looking paperwork and everything, but something about the whole thing felt wrong." Officer Martinez explained that property disputes involving homeowners associations were complicated and that he would need to investigate further before any charges could be filed. He took photos of my garage, collected contact information for the witnesses, and promised to follow up within 24 hours. After he left, I sat on my front porch and tried to process what had happened. A complete stranger had walked onto my property, claimed to have authority she did not possess, and driven away with my lawn mower. And somehow, she had made it all seem almost legitimate. The next morning, I started making phone calls. My first call was to the HOA management company, Pinnacle Property Services, which handled all official business for Maple Grove subdivision. I explained the situation to the receptionist, who transferred me to a property manager named Janet. "I am calling about an incident yesterday involving someone claiming to represent the HOA," I began. "A woman came to my house and took my lawn mower, claiming it was a safety violation." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I am sorry, but I do not have any record of authorized inspections in your neighborhood yesterday. Can you describe this person?" I gave Janet a detailed description of the woman and explained about the official-looking paperwork she had shown me. Janet put me on hold while she checked with her supervisors and reviewed their inspection schedules. "Sir, I can confirm that we did not authorize any property inspections yesterday, and we certainly do not have any authority to remove residents' property. It sounds like this person was not representing our company." I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that the HOA had not actually authorized the theft of my property, but frustration that I was dealing with someone who had no legitimate authority whatsoever. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "This woman has my lawn mower, and she made it seem like she had every right to take it." Janet suggested that I file a police report and provided me with the contact information for the HOA board president. She also offered to send me a letter confirming that no inspections had been authorized, which might help with my police report. My next call was to the police department to follow up on Officer Martinez's report. I was transferred to the detective division, where Detective Sarah Chen reviewed the details of my case. "This is an unusual situation," Detective Chen admitted. "The woman did not use force or threats, and she had what appeared to be official documentation. From a legal standpoint, We have to determine whether this constitutes theft or if it is some kind of civil dispute. I explained that the HOA management company had confirmed that no inspections were authorized and that the woman had no legitimate authority to take my property. Detective Chen said this information would be helpful, but that pressing charges would still be complicated. The problem is that she apparently believed she had authority to take the equipment, Detective Chen explained. If she genuinely thought she was acting in an official capacity, it might not meet the legal definition of theft. I was stunned. So someone can steal my property as long as they believe they have the right to do it. It is more complicated than that, Detective Chen said. But we have to prove intent to permanently deprive you of your property. If she claims this was temporary pending some kind of compliance review, it becomes a civil matter rather than a criminal one. I spent the rest of the day making more phone calls. I contacted the city planning department to see if they had authorized any inspections. I called the county sheriff's office to report the theft. I even called the state attorney general's office to ask about laws regarding fake HOA authority. Every conversation ended the same way. Everyone was sympathetic, but no one seemed to have clear jurisdiction over the situation. The woman had expertly navigated a gray area where criminal law and civil law intersected in confusing ways. By evening, I was exhausted and frustrated. I had spent an entire day trying to get help from the system, and I felt like I was being passed from one bureaucrat to another without making any real progress. That night I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the business card Detective Chen had given me. On the back, she had written a note: "Document everything. Get witness statements. This person has probably done this before." Those words stuck with me. This person has probably done this before. I realized that I might not be dealing with a confused neighbor or an overzealous HOA volunteer. I might be dealing with someone who had turned property theft into a systematic operation. I opened my laptop and began searching for information about HOA fraud and property theft schemes. What I found was disturbing and enlightening. I spent the next 3 days diving deep into research about HOA fraud, property theft, and confidence scams. What I discovered was shocking. There were dozens of cases across the country where people had impersonated HOA officials to gain access to private property and steal valuable items. The schemes were surprisingly sophisticated. Fake paperwork, official-looking identification, and detailed knowledge of local HOA procedures allowed these criminals to operate with confidence and authority. Most victims were so confused by the bureaucratic language and official appearance that they did not realize they were being scammed until it was too late. I found online forums where homeowners shared similar experiences. One woman in Arizona had lost her outdoor furniture to someone claiming to be conducting a community standards audit. A man in Florida had his expensive grill confiscated by a fake HOA representative who said it violated fire safety regulations. In every case, the victims had been left dealing with unresponsive police departments and complex legal questions about jurisdiction and authority. Armed with this new knowledge, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of relying on the authorities to solve my problem, I would conduct my own investigation. I started by canvassing my neighborhood to see if anyone else had encountered the woman who stole my mower. Mrs. Peterson was my first stop. She had been watching from her front porch during the incident and had seemed genuinely concerned. When I knocked on her door, she invited me in for coffee and told me something that changed everything. "I have been thinking about that woman since yesterday," Mrs. Peterson said. "She looked familiar, but I could not place her. Then I remembered seeing her at the community center about 2 weeks ago. She was at the HOA meeting, but she was not on the board. Mrs. Peterson explained that she had attended the meeting to complain about a street light that had been broken for months. The woman had been sitting in the back of the room, taking notes and asking detailed questions about HOA procedures and enforcement policies. She seemed very interested in what authority the HOA had over individual properties, Mrs. Peterson recalled. She asked about inspection procedures, documentation requirements, and temporary seizure policies. I thought she was just a new resident trying to understand the rules. This was the first real lead I had. The woman had been researching HOA procedures and gathering information about enforcement policies. She had been planning this operation for weeks. I asked Mrs. Peterson if she remembered anything else about the woman from the meeting. She thought for a moment and then retrieved a newsletter from her kitchen counter. The meeting was photographed for the newsletter, she said, flipping through the pages. I think she might be in one of the pictures. We found a group photo of meeting attendees, and Mrs. Peterson pointed to a woman standing in the back row. It was definitely the same person who had stolen my mower. The newsletter identified her as Karen Mitchell, a new resident in the Oakwood section of the subdivision. I now had a name and a general location. Karen Mitchell was not some random criminal passing through the neighborhood. She was a resident who had spent time learning about HOA procedures specifically to exploit them for her own benefit. I decided to drive through the Oakwood section to see if I could locate Karen Mitchell's house. It was a newer part of the subdivision with larger lots and more expensive homes. I drove slowly through each street, looking for any signs of my stolen mower. On Maple Ridge Drive, I found what I was looking for. Sitting in the driveway of a large colonial-style house was my John Deere X350 mower. It was parked next to a garage that was filled with other outdoor equipment, including several pieces that looked suspiciously new and expensive. I parked across the street and called Detective Chen to report my findings. She seemed genuinely interested in the new information and promised to follow up with a search warrant if I could provide enough evidence. The fact that she attended HOA meetings and researched enforcement procedures suggests premeditation, Detective Chen explained. If we can prove she planned this theft in advance, it strengthens our case significantly. I spent the rest of the day documenting everything I had learned. I took photos of my mower in Karen Mitchell's driveway, wrote down the details of my conversation with Mrs. Peterson, and created a timeline of events leading up to the theft. That evening, I received a call from Tom Johnson, my neighbor who had filmed the incident. He had been talking to other residents and had discovered that Karen Mitchell had approached several people in the neighborhood over the past month, asking questions about property values, HOA enforcement, and expensive outdoor equipment. She was definitely casing the neighborhood, Tom told me. She knew exactly what she was looking for and how to get it. I realized that I was not just dealing with a confused neighbor or an overzealous HOA volunteer. I was dealing with a sophisticated criminal who had turned property theft into a systematic operation. And now, I had the evidence to prove it. I decided it was time to take direct action. I had enough evidence to prove that Karen Mitchell was a fraud, and I was tired of waiting for the authorities to figure out their jurisdiction issues. I called Detective Chen and told her I was planning to confront Karen Mitchell at her house and demand the return of my property. I would strongly advise against that, Detective Chen warned. Let us handle this through official channels. We are working on getting a search warrant. But I had lost patience with official channels. I had spent 4 days being transferred from one bureaucrat to another while my stolen property sat in plain sight in this woman's driveway. I told Detective Chen I would be respectful and non-confrontational, but I was going to get my mower back. I drove to Maple Ridge Drive with Tom Johnson, who had volunteered to come with me as a witness. We parked across the street from Karen Mitchell's house and walked up to her front door. I could see my mower sitting in the driveway, exactly where I had seen it the day before. I knocked on the door and waited. After about 30 seconds, Karen Mitchell opened the door with the same stern expression she had worn during our first encounter. She was wearing the same yellow safety vest and had a clipboard in her hand. "I am here to retrieve my lawn mower," I said calmly. "The one you took from my property yesterday without authorization." Karen Mitchell's expression did not change. "I told you yesterday that the equipment was being temporarily relocated pending a compliance review. The review is still in progress." "I have spoken with the HOA management company," I replied. "They confirmed that no inspections were authorized and that you have no authority to remove residents' property." She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "The management company is not aware of all enforcement activities. Some actions are authorized directly by the board for security purposes." I could see Tom Johnson shaking his head in disbelief. This woman was doubling down on her lie, even when confronted with evidence that contradicted her story. "Karen, I know who you are," I said, using her real name for the first time. "You are Karen Mitchell, you live at this address, and you attended HOA meetings to research enforcement procedures. You planned this theft in advance." For the first time, her confident demeanor cracked slightly. She seemed surprised that I knew her name and had connected her to the HOA meetings. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, but her voice lacked the authority it had carried during our previous encounter. "I have photos of you at the HOA meeting," I continued. "I have witness statements from neighbors who saw you asking questions about property enforcement. I have video of you stealing my mower, and I have photos of my mower sitting in your driveway right now." Karen Mitchell looked at my mower and then back at me. I could see her mind working, trying to calculate her next move. "The equipment is being stored securely pending resolution of compliance issues," she said, falling back on her bureaucratic language. "Once proper storage arrangements are made, it will be returned." "What compliance issues?" I asked. "What specific violations are you claiming?" She pulled out her clipboard and began shuffling through papers. "Multiple violations including improper storage, potential safety hazards, and failure to comply with community standards." "Show me the specific regulations," I demanded. "Show me the documentation that gives you authority to enforce these regulations." Karen Mitchell held up the same manila folder she had shown me during our first encounter, but this time I was prepared. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I am recording this conversation," I announced. "Please show me the specific HOA regulations that authorize you to remove residents' property." She quickly pulled the folder back and held it against her chest. "You are not authorized to record official HOA proceedings." "This is not an official proceeding," I replied. "This is a conversation between neighbors about stolen property. Now please show me your documentation or return my mower." Karen Mitchell's facade was crumbling. She looked nervous and uncertain for the first time since I had met her. The confident authority figure was being replaced by someone who realized she had been caught in an elaborate lie. "I will need to consult with the board before making any decisions about equipment relocation," she said, retreating toward her front door. The board has no authority over my property, I replied firmly. And you have no authority to keep my mower. I am giving you one chance to return it voluntarily before I call the police. She opened her front door and started to go inside, but I called out to her one more time. Karen, you have been researching HOA procedures for weeks. You know exactly what you are doing, and you know it is illegal. Return my property now or face the consequences. She slammed the door behind her without responding. I looked at Tom Johnson, who had been filming the entire conversation with his phone. Well, that went about as well as expected, Tom said. She is definitely not going to return your mower voluntarily. I walked over to my mower and examined it closely. It appeared to be in good condition, with no signs of damage or misuse. I took several photos of it sitting in Karen Mitchell's driveway and documented its exact location. As we walked back to my car, I called Detective Chen and reported the results of my confrontation. She was not happy that I had approached Karen Mitchell directly, but she was interested in the evidence I had gathered. The fact that she is still claiming official authority even after being confronted suggests she is either delusional or extremely committed to this fraud, Detective Chen observed. Either way, we have enough evidence to move forward with charges. That evening, I received a call from the HOA board president, who had heard about the situation from other residents. He wanted to schedule an emergency meeting to address the issue and prevent future incidents. This is exactly the kind of situation we need to prevent, he said. Someone impersonating HOA officials undermines the entire system and puts all residents at risk. I agreed to attend the meeting, but I made it clear that my priority was getting my property back. The HOA politics could be sorted out later. The emergency HOA meeting was held 3 days later in the community center. I arrived to find the room packed with residents who had heard about the Karen Mitchell situation. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood, and everyone wanted to know how someone had managed to steal property while claiming official authority. The board president, Michael Torres, opened the meeting by acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. We have a resident who has been impersonating HOA officials and removing property from people's homes. This is unacceptable and potentially criminal. I was invited to present my evidence to the full board and the assembled residents. I showed photos of Karen Mitchell at previous meetings, played video of her stealing my mower, and displayed pictures of my property in her driveway. The room was silent as I walked through the timeline of events. The most concerning aspect of this situation, I concluded, is how easily she was able to create an appearance of authority. She knew exactly what to say and how to present herself to make her actions seem legitimate. Michael Torres thanked me for my presentation and announced that the board was implementing new policies to prevent future impersonation incidents. All official inspections would require advance notice, proper identification, and verification through the management company. We will also be sending a letter to all residents clarifying that HOA representatives never have authority to remove personal property, he added. Anyone claiming such authority should be reported to the police immediately. After the meeting, Detective Chen approached me with good news. We obtained a search warrant for Karen Mitchell's property this morning. We found your mower, along with several other items that appear to have been stolen from other neighborhoods. She explained that Karen Mitchell had been running similar scams in multiple subdivisions across the county. She had stolen outdoor furniture, grills, landscaping equipment, and other valuable items by impersonating various officials and claiming enforcement authority. She had a whole storage unit filled with stolen property, Detective Chen revealed. We are working with other police departments to identify the owners and return everything to its rightful place. Karen Mitchell was arrested and charged with multiple counts of theft, fraud, and impersonation of a public official. The evidence was overwhelming, and she eventually pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. I got my mower back the next day, along with a formal apology from the county sheriff's office for the confusion about jurisdiction. Detective Chen explained that cases like this were becoming more common as criminals found new ways to exploit homeowners' trust in official authority. The key lesson here, she told me, is that no legitimate official will ever remove your property without proper documentation and advance notice. When in doubt, always verify through official channels. The story had a lasting impact on the Maple Grove subdivision. The HOA implemented new security measures and communication protocols to prevent future fraud. Residents became more vigilant about verifying the credentials of anyone claiming official authority. Karen Mitchell was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all her victims. She was also banned from serving in any HOA capacity and required to register as a theft offender. As for me, I learned valuable lessons about standing up to bullies and not accepting authority at face value. I also became more involved in HOA governance, helping to create policies that protect residents from fraud while maintaining necessary community standards. Sunday mornings in Maple Grove are peaceful again. I still sit on my front porch with my coffee, and I still take pride in maintaining my property. But now I know that sometimes the biggest threats to our peace of mind come from people who exploit our trust in the systems designed to protect us. My mower sits in the same spot in my garage, ready for another weekend of yard work. The only difference is that now I keep the keys in the house.